Late night settled over the opulent Blackwood mansion like a thick, suffocating veil. The chandeliers cast trembling shadows across the marble floors, their golden glow unable to warm the icy stillness that had swallowed every room. Outside, the distant hum of the city moved with its usual rhythm, cars passing, horns echoing faintly, life continuing, but inside, it felt as if time itself had stopped. Olivia Carter sat on the edge of her son's bed, her arms wrapped around tiny, feverish Lucas, his small body trembling weakly against her chest. His breaths came in shallow, fragile puffs, each one sounding more labored than the last. She kept brushing her palm across his forehead, whispering soothing words, her voice breaking every few sentences as fear gripped her tighter. Her phone lay beside her, screen lit up with call logs, Ethan Blackwood, Ethan Blackwood, Ethan Blackwood, all unanswered. She dialed again, pressing the device hard against her ear as if closeness alone could force him to pick up. But just like before, it rang endlessly before slipping to voicemail. Somewhere in a hotel room miles away, he slept in the arms of Vivian Moore, blissfully unaware, or uncaring, of the disaster unfolding at home. Olivia had sensed the betrayal long before tonight, the unfamiliar perfume lingering in his office, the way he'd avoid her eyes, the unopened messages she found in his phone. But she never imagined betrayal could feel like this, so sharp, so cruel, so final. Lucas' fingers twitched weakly, reaching for her one last time. She leaned down, holding him close, and before she could process it, before she could beg him to stay, his final breath slipped out against her collarbone. The silence that followed shattered her world into pieces, marking the beginning of a grief that would demand vengeance, justice, and reckoning. Olivia Carter had always been the kind of woman people naturally gravitated toward, gentle in spirit yet firm in her values, soft-spoken but undeniably resilient. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, the kind that came from knowing who she was and the kind of home she wanted to build. As a mother, she poured every piece of her heart into Lucas, nurturing him with patience and joy, creating a world where he felt endlessly loved. As a wife, she tried to be supportive and understanding, even when the cracks in her marriage began to appear. Deep down, she was ambitious too. She had dreams of her own, but she put them on hold to build a family she believed in. Ethan Blackwood, on the other hand, was a man shaped by excess. The wealthy CEO of a thriving corporate empire, he carried charm like a weapon, using it to manipulate deals, people, and eventually even his own marriage. On the surface, he was magnetic, polished suits, smooth words, and a signature smile that could convince anyone he cared. But beneath that facade lived a hunger for more power, more validation, more attention. That hunger led him straight into the arms of Vivian Moore, the woman who treated seduction like an art form. Vivian was elegance wrapped in danger, steely-eyed, calculating, and always a step ahead. She knew how to stroke Ethan's ego, how to feed his fantasies, how to make him feel invincible, and he fell willingly into her trap. Their son, Lucas, was the only pure thing in that house. His laughter once filled the mansion, the only thing that reminded Olivia why she kept fighting for her family. Her father, Richard Carter, a retired military officer with a commanding presence and an unshakable sense of justice, had always warned her about Ethan's weaknesses. But love made Olivia hopeful, and for years she held on to the good moments, until they became too few to remember. The marriage had begun with passion and promise, but as Ethan's obsession with Vivian grew, so did the distance between him and the family he vowed to protect. Betrayal seeped into their home long before tragedy struck, quietly poisoning everything Olivia cherished. The night Lucas slipped away was a night Olivia would replay in her mind for the rest of her life. It began with a sudden spike in his fever, a heat so intense it felt like it burned through her palm when she touched his forehead. Panic surged through her as she hurried across the room, fumbling for the thermometer, the medicine, anything that might buy him a little time. His breaths were shallow, his skin clammy, and his small hands twitched helplessly against the sheets. She knelt beside him, whispering soothing words even as her own voice trembled with fear. Her fingers shook as she dialed emergency services, begging them to hurry, to please not take too long. Her son was fading right in front of her. Across the city, Ethan Blackwood lay sprawled across a luxurious hotel bed, warm laughter spilling from his lips as Vivian traced a finger along his jaw. Candlelight flickered against the walls, soft music played in the background, and the only urgency in his life was the next sip of expensive wine. His phone buzzed again and again on the nightstand, screen lighting up with Olivia's name, but he barely glanced at it. The sound irritated him, disrupting the illusion of a perfect night, so he switched the device to silent and tossed it aside, letting Vivian pull him closer. Back at the mansion, Olivia clutched Lucas to her chest, rocking him as if motion alone could keep him alive. The distant wail of approaching sirens offered a sliver of hope, but as she looked down at him, she saw the light slipping from his eyes. His tiny chest rose one last time, then stilled. A silent scream tore through her, too raw for sound, her entire world collapsing into that single, devastating moment. While she cradled her lifeless child, Ethan lay tangled in silk sheets, completely unaware that the consequence of his neglect had already changed everything. The contrast was brutal, her heartbreak against his indulgence, sealing the audience's anger toward him and their sympathy for the woman who had just lost everything. The hours after Lucas's death moved in a blur, as if Olivia were drifting through a world made of fog. One moment she was holding his still body, refusing to let anyone take him from her, and the next she was standing in a quiet funeral home, choosing flowers with shaking hands. Everything felt wrong, too calm, too organized, too detached from the storm tearing her apart from the inside. High society acquaintances arrived in polished cars, offering rehearsed condolences, their voices low and gentle, their eyes filled with pity rather than genuine grief. Olivia forced herself to stand upright, to respond, to behave like the composed wife of a wealthy man, even though a part of her wanted to scream until the walls cracked. But beneath her devastation, something else simmered, a sharp, cold seed of vengeance. Each memory of Ethan ignoring her calls, each flash of his betrayal, fed that seed, giving it shape and direction. She didn't speak it aloud, not yet, but it lived in her eyes, in the tightness of her jaw, in the way she refused to meet his gaze. Richard Carter's reaction was the opposite of silence. The moment he arrived, his fury was palpable, contained but intense, like a soldier restraining himself before battle. He watched Ethan with narrowed eyes, already calculating, already planning the path to accountability. Ethan stood near the casket wearing a mask of sorrow, his posture perfect for public sympathy. Vivian lingered in the shadows, inappropriate yet unashamed, her presence like a slap across Olivia's aching heart. Olivia battled the war inside her, grief tearing her apart while justice whispered for attention, knowing this was only the beginning of a far deeper reckoning. Richard Carter stepped into Olivia's home not as a grieving grandfather but as a man preparing for war. The loss of Lucas had carved something fierce into his expression, an unwavering resolve to dismantle the man responsible. While Olivia tried to navigate her days through a haze of pain, Richard quietly gathered every document, every financial statement, every corporate file connected to Ethan Blackwood. Years of military discipline sharpened his focus. He worked with precision, identifying weaknesses in Ethan's business empire that only someone with Richard's experience could spot. Offshore accounts, illegal tax strategies, hidden debts, secret real estate transactions, nothing escaped his attention. He reached out discreetly to old contacts, lawyers who owed him favors, investigators who respected him, retired officers who knew how to dig into places the public never sees. Conversations happened in low voices, behind closed doors, over encrypted messages. Each meeting added another piece to the puzzle, another layer to Ethan's inevitable downfall. When he realized Vivian Moore's greed outweighed her loyalty, Richard even considered using her as leverage. A few strategically placed hints about Ethan's wealth, inheritance, and hidden assets could tempt her into making costly mistakes. Vanity was her weakness, and Richard understood that exploiting it could fracture their alliance from within. Olivia watched all this with a mixture of guilt and grim acceptance. She struggled with the morality of revenge. Lucas wouldn't return, and part of her wanted to retreat into her grief rather than pursue destruction. But another part, the one that remembered Ethan laughing while her son died, knew justice had to be served. Trusting her father felt like trusting solid ground after drowning. Meanwhile, Ethan drifted through life without noticing the shadows gathering behind him. His arrogance served as blindfolds. He dismissed quiet rumors, ignored strained business relationships, and underestimated the quiet, deliberate shifts happening around him. Richard began the first subtle moves, anonymous leaks to the media, murmurs of corporate corruption whispered in the right circles, small disruptions that loosened Ethan's hold on his allies. The storm was forming, deliberate and silent, and Ethan remained blissfully unaware that every breath he took brought him closer to the trap tightening around him. In the weeks that followed Lucas's funeral, Ethan's life moved in a direction that stunned even those who knew him well. Instead of withdrawing into grief or reflection, he plunged headfirst into extravagance, as if trying to drown any trace of responsibility in champagne and velvet hotel suites. Vivian hosted private parties for him, hidden gatherings filled with wealthy associates, intoxicating music, and reckless indulgence. Ethan spent money with the same ease he breathed, confident that his wealth was an endless fountain and that no one could touch him. While Richard quietly pulled invisible strings behind the scenes, Ethan walked through life with an untouchable swagger. He laughed off minor business setbacks, insisting they were temporary fluctuations. When a trusted associate warned him about unsettling rumors circulating among investors, Ethan dismissed it with a smirk, saying people were jealous of his success. He believed everything was under his control, that no one would ever dare move against him. But subtle signs of trouble crept into his days, small enough to ignore yet potent enough to foreshadow disaster. Phone calls he expected never reached him, as if someone intercepted them before they could spark concern. Legal documents he distinctly remembered signing vanished from his office, replaced by duplicates that didn't quite match. Emails from board members arrived with a curious chill, their tone polite yet distant. Behind his back, whispers grew louder, rumors of fraud, infidelity, and instability threading their way through elite circles. Instead of recognizing the danger, Ethan leaned deeper into arrogance, convinced he was too powerful to fall. It was exactly that confidence, that blind superiority, which allowed Richard's carefully crafted plan to tighten its grip around him, step by silent step. Richard Carter moved with the patience of a man who understood that the most devastating blows were the ones delivered slowly, silently, and with precision. He knew Ethan Blackwood thrived on control, on the illusion that he was the center of every room, every deal, every relationship. So Richard began dismantling that illusion one quiet strike at a time. He targeted Ethan's finances first, manipulating investments through subtle market shifts and strategic leaks. Contracts Ethan expected to secure slipped through his fingers at the last minute. Promising deals collapsed overnight, investors backing out with vague excuses about instability. Ethan chalked it up to bad luck at first, but the failures accumulated too neatly, too consistently, to be coincidence. From there, Richard shifted to social pressure. The same influential allies who once toasted Ethan's brilliance now whispered behind his back, questioning the integrity they once praised. Rumors of mismanagement, infidelity, and corruption began circulating in elite gatherings, whispers seeded by Richard through the right channels. Invitations to high-profile events dwindled, partnerships cooled, and even those who still supported Ethan did so with visible hesitation. Nothing wounds a man like Ethan more than losing the approval of the world he sought to impress. Meanwhile, the emotional battlefield began to crack. Vivian Moore, always alert to threats against her own comfort, grew uneasy as Ethan's charm faltered under stress. His temper flared more often, his attention shifted forward into panic rather than pleasure, and she began questioning whether his wealth, and thus her lifestyle, was slipping away. Richard took advantage of her insecurity, feeding her carefully crafted fragments of information that made her doubt Ethan's loyalty and stability. The once sparkling relationship dulled, turning sharp at the edges. Amid all of this, Olivia quietly transformed. Grief no longer paralyzed her, it sharpened her. She began reclaiming parts of her life Ethan had overshadowed, speaking with a steady voice in meetings her father arranged, standing firmly as decisions were made about her future. Strength replaced helplessness, not loudly, but undeniably. Ethan, however, finally sensed something was wrong. The pattern of failures, the tense glances, the unease in Vivian's eyes, it all pressed against him like a warning he couldn't decipher. The psychological warfare was working, uncertainty crawled under his skin, and for the first time, he felt the ground beneath him shift. Richard's final move was not loud, it was surgical. After weeks of silent groundwork, he released the single thread that would unravel Ethan Blackwood's entire image. Late one evening, a flood of files reached major media outlets and influential online platforms. Photos of Ethan and Vivian in intimate settings, screenshots of late-night messages dripping with infidelity, and copies of confidential contracts revealing questionable financial transactions Ethan had tried to keep buried. Within hours, headlines exploded across every major channel. What had once been whispers became an uncontrollable storm. Ethan Blackwood, the polished CEO, was now plastered everywhere as a liar, a cheater, and a corrupt businessman. Stockholders panicked, reporters camped outside the Blackwood headquarters, and board members scrambled to distance themselves from him. Social media erupted, mocking his hypocrisy. Analysts tore apart his past deals, finding inconsistencies Richard had known they'd uncover once they looked closely. The damage wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Vivian Moore's reaction was volcanic. Instead of standing by Ethan, she turned on him instantly. She felt betrayed, not by his cheating, for she never expected loyalty, but by the fact that he hadn't protected her. He had allowed their affair to become public, dragging her into a scandal that threatened her own carefully curated lifestyle. Furious and humiliated, she packed her things and left him with sharp words and zero hesitation. Their alliance shattered, not with drama but with icy finality. Desperate and wounded, Ethan stormed into Olivia's home, expecting a fight, perhaps even expecting her to crumble. Instead, he found her calm, seated across from her father, her posture straight and her expression unreadable. Her silence struck harder than any insult. She met his accusations with composure, letting him unravel while she watched as a ghost of the woman he once controlled. For the first time, Ethan saw consequences he couldn't charm or threaten his way out of. His pride cracked, his ego splintered, and his mask collapsed. The audience, at last, witnessed the man who let his child die while chasing pleasure finally face the reckoning he earned. Ethan Blackwood's carefully constructed empire began to unravel with a speed he had never anticipated. Official letters and legal notices flooded his office, each one carrying allegations of fraud, embezzlement, and corporate malpractice he had long believed could be concealed. Regulatory authorities launched intensive investigations, auditors combing through every contract, every account, and every hidden transaction, exposing a web of mismanagement and deceit. Lawsuits from disgruntled partners and betrayed investors piled up, forcing Ethan into high-profile courtrooms where his charm and wealth offered no protection against the weight of the law. Financial penalties escalated, bank accounts were frozen, and his lavish lifestyle, once a symbol of dominance, became a public spectacle of humiliation. Meanwhile, Richard Carter acted with precision, ensuring Olivia's safety and independence. He secured her assets, untangled her from any legal or financial entanglements, and guaranteed that she would emerge unscathed and empowered. Olivia, once vulnerable and silenced, now carried herself with unwavering confidence, her every step calculated and purposeful. The poetic justice was undeniable. Ethan, who had wielded power and deceit as weapons, was stripped of his wealth, influence, and social credibility, while Olivia and Richard retained their dignity and moral authority. Victimhood had been transformed into empowerment, a clear testament to resilience and strategic foresight. Where Ethan faced public disgrace and personal ruin, Olivia embraced freedom and control over her future, proving that courage and careful planning could triumph over betrayal, manipulation, and greed, leaving him a hollow figure amid the ruins of his own making. Olivia stood in the grand living room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the polished floors. Ethan Blackwood faced her, his expression a complex mix of defiance and regret. The tension was palpable, every word hanging between them like a fragile thread. "Olivia, you have to understand," Ethan began, his voice strained, "everything I did for us, for Lucas, for our future." But Olivia's eyes, steady and unwavering, met his with a clarity that cut deeper than any accusation. "For us? Or for yourself, Ethan? You chose lies over love, greed over family. You betrayed everything we believed in, everything Lucas deserves." Her voice, calm yet laden with controlled fury, left him momentarily speechless. Ethan faltered, searching for excuses, grasping at fragments of justification, but Olivia dismantled each one with precision, exposing the truth he had buried beneath charm and deception. Across the room, Richard Carter observed silently, his presence commanding yet restrained, a steady reminder that justice and protection were unwaveringly on Olivia's side. The weight of his eyes added a gravity to every sentence Olivia spoke, reinforcing the moral authority she now embodied. As the confrontation drew to a close, Olivia's anger softened, replaced by a quiet, resolute peace. She had forgiven internally, not for Ethan, but for herself, allowing her to move forward without bitterness. Ethan, stripped of his power over her, could only face the consequences of his actions, while Olivia and Lucas would continue their lives untainted. In that room, amidst the echoes of betrayal and unspoken love, justice was served, and Olivia found a profound sense of closure, strong, unwavering, and finally free. Olivia Carter stepped into the morning light of her new apartment, the soft glow of sunrise spilling across the walls like a promise of new beginnings. Each day now held purpose, a rhythm she had once feared she would lose. She traveled to cities she had always dreamed of exploring, immersing herself in art galleries, cafes, and streets bustling with life, each journey a small act of reclaiming freedom. Her career flourished as she focused on meaningful projects, her dedication and creativity earning admiration and respect. Hobbies long neglected, painting, reading, and yoga, became sources of joy and personal fulfillment, allowing her mind and spirit to heal. Friendships blossomed organically, supportive and genuine, a stark contrast to the superficial ties she had once tolerated. Richard remained a steadfast presence, his guidance both protective and empowering, helping Olivia navigate her independence while respecting her choices. In her living room, a small hand-painted figurine from Lucas rested on the shelf, a quiet symbol of love, hope, and the life she was building for herself and her son. The future, uncertain but brimming with possibility, felt expansive rather than threatening. Olivia's heart, once shadowed by betrayal and grief, now beat with resilience and self-respect. Across town, Ethan Blackwood's world had narrowed into silence. Wealth, influence, and charm could not shield him from isolation, leaving him to face the consequences of his selfishness alone. Olivia, in contrast, embraced her autonomy, hinting at a life that might one day include love on her terms, or simply the deep satisfaction of self-fulfillment, a life wholly her own, radiant and unbound. Olivia stood by the window of her sunlit living room, the gentle flicker of a candle casting warm shadows in memory of Lucas, a quiet reminder of innocence and love that anchored her life. Family portraits lined the walls, each smile frozen in time, reinforcing the strength and unity she now carried within herself. The lingering presence of Ethan Blackwood, once so commanding and oppressive, had faded into insignificance. His dominance was no longer a shadow over her life. Richard Carter watched from nearby, his steady gaze a testament to the power of justice and moral clarity, the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly without a single act of violence. Olivia's heart ached for the past, for the betrayals endured, yet each pang was tempered by resilience and the hard-earned wisdom of survival. She breathed deeply, embracing the bittersweet mixture of sorrow and empowerment, aware that she had reclaimed her life through courage, strategy, and unwavering integrity. The room, bathed in candlelight and morning glow, felt both a sanctuary and a stage for the triumph of truth and morality. As Olivia turned to Lucas, their hands brushing, hope shimmered quietly on the horizon, open-ended, luminous, and full of promise, a life rebuilt, guided by love, strength, and the enduring power of justice.